Robert would say, all the good people are here. Speaking of which, I saw Robert McDermott 2 days ago, and he sends his love. He was hoping to be here this week, but can't be, so he wanted all of you to know that he's thinking of you, and he's excited that this is happening. It's my privilege to get to introduce Sean Kelly tonight for what might be one of the most anticipated PCC retreat talks in a very long time. When we're finally broaching the subject that weirdly has not been talked about that much in previous PCC retreats, and that is unidentified anomalous phenomena. Did I get that right?
Well, aerial or anomalous, yeah, both. Yeah.
So Sean Kelly doesn't need much introduction. He is now the senior member of the Boston Cosmology faculty. I didn't say senior citizen, senior. And Sean I only found out within the last couple of years that Sean has been thinking about UFO-related phenomena, UAP things for decades, and once taught a course. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll have a little slide there in front.
Actually, on these sorts of things, which is fascinating because we're in the middle of a time of a real resurgence of interest in UAP and related phenomena, both at the scholarly and the popular level. So it's a perfect time to have Sean lead us into another way of thinking about these things. So if you would, please join me in welcoming to the microphone, Sean Kelly.
Thank you. So happy to be here. I want to begin, since we began with X-Files theme music, we'll go to something a little more, with a little more gravitas as an epigraph to tonight's presentation. And it's just a line from, or a couple of lines, one sentence from Jung, from his book on UFOs, which I'll come to later on. It is not presumption that drives me, but my conscience as a psychiatrist that bids me fulfill my duty and prepare those few who will hear me for coming events which are in accord with the end of an era. I'll read that again. It is not presumption that drives me, presumably in writing this book, but also more generally in this whole project of life's project. It is not presumption that drives me, but my conscience as a psychiatrist that bids me fulfill my duty and prepare those few who will hear me for coming events which are in accord with the end of an era. Okay? So this is Jung in 1959, I believe. I think it's 59 in his book on UFOs. I'll come back to that. So as Jake was saying, how many of you have seen this image? Probably a lot of you. It's really been in the media from I think the so-called Nimitz incident. So what, 3 years ago now? 2.5, 3 years ago? The military finally released some footage of apparently very unusual nature of unidentified aerial phenomena in this case. So the new UAP is the term that is favored now by most people instead of UFO. UAP can also stand though for unidentified anomalous phenomena, which would cover a much broader range of phenomena, not just things seen in the sky. But this is one of the most a still from a video, which has become very famous. And there seems to be no, at least universally agreed upon explanation of what the thing is. So if you haven't seen it, you can look it up and decide for yourself. But it was presented along with other material recently to Congress. There were, I guess it was Congress, special congressional hearings on UAP phenomena. And testifying were former pilots, one on the far right there from the Nimitz incident, who actually witnessed these things himself. Let me see, in the middle, I think is it Grush? Yeah. So David, David Grush in the middle, who has testified before Congress about a so-called legacy program involving several decades of retrieval of crashed craft and reverse engineering of technology and study of so-called biologics. I hate that term, but it's being used. In other words, alien bodies. Okay? So he hasn't seen these things himself, but he knows somebody who says they've seen them. Okay? So that's already pretty interesting. All right, these hearings happened about a year ago, I think, and there's supposed to be a year and a half ago, there's supposed to be some legislation following it, but it's been held up in Congress. New hearings are scheduled after the elections, so we'll see what happens. Okay. One of the other people that you'll probably come across, he's doing a lot of interviews around his recent book, is Lou Elizondo, who claims, although the Pentagon denies it, that he worked very closely with the Pentagon in this area. And anyway, he and other people are trying to get the public ready for what's called disclosure. And this person, Stephen Greer, who actually Vince here knows and has worked with, is the leading person in the so-called disclosure movement. Now he has been, so he just testified as well in the most recent hearings, but he actually testified in 2000, I guess it was 2000, I think it was 2000, should say, when he first initiated the disclosure project. So at that time, he had already accumulated testimony from various whistleblowers, former Pentagon military, and other people testifying to UAPs, testifying to all kinds of related material. And I remember this happening, and there was a lot of excitement around it, but nothing came of it. Some people say nothing came of it because 9/11 happened, and that changed everything. The whole scene changed. But the excitement that was around at that time, shortly after I first came to CIS in 1997, there were I knew a lot of people who were involved. It just fizzled out. But back then, as now, there were people saying that disclosure is imminent. And we've gathered all of this testimony, all of this evidence. So this is back almost 30 years ago. Now there's a lot more evidence. You can go to Stephen Greer's website, the Disclosure Archives, check out the material for yourself, see what you think. Okay. This is the first disclosure project document. It was only one book back then. Now it's a lot more material. It just so happens that yesterday, I didn't know this, I just added this slide today. Yesterday was the first Global Disclosure Day. Before coming here, I got a text from Theo, PCC alum, who said, "Sean, do you know that tomorrow is Global Disclosure Day?" And he told me about this live stream that I watched from 10 a.m. to 12 yesterday with Danny Sheehan, who is the lawyer involved in the Watergate trials, and Jim Garrison. Jim Garrison is the head of the New Paradigm Institute, the principal mission of which is to sponsor research on UAP and related phenomena and to prepare the wider public for disclosure in a way that will make them ready to receive this news without freaking out. That's the main purpose. Okay. Now you can watch, I encourage you to watch this. It should be available on YouTube now. It was live streamed yesterday, but you should be able to watch it on your own. And it's really striking. Jim Garrison, who has organized in the past conferences and panels with luminaries that you may know, including Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff, all sorts of people. So here's Jim Garrison. If you watch it, you'll see him. He's almost in a state of ecstasy, just saying, you know, this is the most important event in human history. And because we now know we are not alone. That's what he's saying. And he and Danny Sheehan and all these people really believe this. Part of me feels like saying, wow, but we've never really been, we've never been alone. There's a whole Earth community. There's the other than human beings, I know. And there's also my ancestors, there's angels, there's saints. There's a lot. Anyway, that's another matter. We can come back to it. But it's really striking. Watch this and see what you think and feel. Okay. So disclosure, another word for disclosure, very close cognate etymologically, is apocalypse or revelation. So apocalypse or revelation means lifting the veil, so it's disclosing. And I put this here because apocalypse is the last act in what William Blake called the Great Code of art and literature, which in my book Coming Home, I apply to the idea of the evolution of main currents in the Western worldview. The Christian worldview served as the Great Code for Western civilization for about 1,500 years. In the last act, the main acts are creation, incarnation, apocalypse. Those are the three main acts of the Great Code. So here we are at the moment of disclosure, just stating the obvious here. Why 2024, right? 2,224 years since the birth of Christ. Whether or not, whatever your relationship to Christianity is, it's so deeply embedded in the cultural operating system, not only of the West, but of the whole time sense of how most countries, nations, and so on count. Of course, there are other calendars. There's the Mayan calendar, there's the Jewish calendar, and so on. But still, everybody uses this calendar as well. I want to spend a little bit of time here on some images around the. Oh, here, okay, I should have said this to begin with. I moved the slide. Originally, I had the slide that I've moved later, but I'll tell you what the slide says. It is just a picture of the course description of a course I taught in my first semester at CIS in 1997, and it's called The Myth of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. We can read the blurb when we get there. But by myth, I mean with Jung, a sacred story, a numinous story that can, if it's powerful enough, organize a whole worldview. It can catalyze a whole culture. It can actually, literally, restructure a planet, which arguably the Christian mythos has done. Now, the reason I say this is that Christianity is a myth of extraterrestrial intelligence. If you look at the whole story, here we have from the Hebrew scriptures, Ezekiel, the vision of Ezekiel, Hebrew prophet, seeing the Ancient of Days. Now, we don't know what really, quotes, happened with Ezekiel. There are many interpretations. Jung has his interpretation. But one thing that's happening, apparently, is that the prophet is seeing something in the sky, and it's numinous, it's overwhelming in its power. In fact, it's identified with the Godhead, who created the whole cosmos and who is guiding the destiny of the Jewish people. And then, of course, later the Christians, and if you're a believing Christian, Jew, or a Muslim, guiding the destiny of the whole planet and cosmos. There's a few other images of how in this mythic framework, you have the cosmos that is being presided over by a divine principle. In this case, since we were then and still are in a fundamentally patriarchal cultural context, the Godhead is depicted as a male, as an elderly male. This is another image of, you can see Earth in the middle, Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, the name of God at the top, the world soul, the anima mundi, as the mediator between the Godhead and Earth, with the spheres of the angels and then the sphere of the fixed stars, and then the 7 planets, and then the moon, and so on. So this is the medieval, it's the Ptolemaic and medieval, but then the medieval cosmos, within which the Western imagination lived for so long. Okay, so here's another scene where we have actually a depiction of intimations of that first creation, the perfection of the first creation in mandalic form, but then to the right, the fall and the expulsion from the garden. Okay. Yeah, so it's the angel Gabriel. We don't see, although I don't see the sword. Usually, often you'll see Gabriel with the sword, who is barring the way back to the garden after Adam and Eve have been expelled. So that's the second, or it's the transition between the first act and the center of the drama. You have creation, well, creation, fall, redemption, or you could say creation, incarnation, new creation, and apocalypse. There's different ways of characterizing the acts. Okay, I'm going to show you just a few images here of the central mythologem, the central living symbol of the Great Code, which is incarnation. And you can see it more beautifully here. This is one of my favorite images of all time. It's one of Fra Angelico's depictions of the Annunciation. The Annunciation is that moment where the angel Gabriel tells Mary that she's pregnant with God, yeah? Basically. And you see here the descent of the Spirit from the upper left in the form of a dove, if you follow the light ray. And so that's the impregnation of from the Stoic, the logos, actually the logos spermatikos, actually the spermatozoic logos, the word of God, which is the creative principle. But in this case, it's entering into Mary's womb directly in order to bring into being the new creation. Okay, so the initial creation was perfect, it was good. God said it was good, and it was good. But then there's the fall, right? So it's somehow off or broken. But with this new incarnation, there is the possibility, at least, of some kind of redemption. We could let me see. There's a lot more I could say about this image, but I want to get to the next version of it. So this is a later depiction of the same moment. Notice the difference, the feeling tone difference, first of all, between here and here. And those of you who read Gebser will know what's going on here. Where's Jessie? Is she here? Oh, there you are. Okay. So we could say this is the shift from pre-perspectival to perspectival consciousness. So in this one, there's still actually there's the beginnings of perspective. There's the intimations of perspectival consciousness, in that you can see the space behind Mary. So with the moment of incarnation, actually, matter is starting to unfold in its 3 spatial dimensions. So you start to get this depth that is emerging with the night sky. The motif of the night sky with the blue dome and the golden stars is actually taken over from Isis and Nut. If you see the Egyptian goddess Nut, the night sky, but depictions of Isis as well. But it comes to be associated with Mary. Anyway, once you get to the later Renaissance, now what you see, what do you see? You see you see more space. You see the matter, including just the folds in the robes and so on, are very realistically depicted. And the Mary and the angel, you could tell that the artist had real people sit for them. I don't remember who the artist is in this case. I assume it was a he. But we have a realistic depiction of matter, including the flowers, the robes, and everything. Interestingly, the angel still has, you can glimpse the wings visible, partially hidden by the folded cloth and so on. So there's still a hint that this is an angel. Okay. Now, once we get to, all right, whoops, I skipped one. Where is it? It's not showing it. That's strange. Oh, here, jeez. No, whoops. It's not showing. There's another one here. It's not showing, but in any case, skipping. This is, here we have a late postmodern Annunciation. This is the moment of conception. Now notice, so one thing you notice here is that the matter in all of its transience and radical finitude, you know, the paint is chipping, the colors and so on. It's matter, and it's matter as impermanent. So it's pure impermanence, but, and she's veiled. Look what's happened to the descent of the Holy Spirit from the transcendent realm that we saw in Fra Angelico. It's not there, right? We're now purely on the horizontal plane of matter. So the movement of incarnation has completed itself in one sense, such that there's no longer any above. There's no longer any transcendence. It's pure immanence. So instead of the descent of the Holy Spirit, we have this tube that is coming from her umbilical and going into the womb. So there's a kind of uroboric circulation here in the body of Mary. So there's nothing but the body of Mary here. Okay. So what I've tried to illustrate here is how this central living symbol of incarnation, which is the kind of center of the mandala of the Great Code, catalyzes a process of what's normally called secularization, associated also with globalization, with all kinds of related processes, but in which the ancient and medieval direct experience and imaginal symbolization, an intuitive sense of the transcendent recedes until finally it's not there anymore. All we have is matter energy and the cosmos. Now I'm going to show you a kind of fractal repetition of that process in the sense of my own biography. So here I am. My first, I'm a little embarrassed to show it, but just to show you that, this was my life at a certain point. This is my first communion. And of course, I had the naive experience and conception of however old I was, 7 maybe. And so there's the angel there and so on. Okay, all right. And then shortly after that, or about the same time actually, in the 60s, was the Gemini program, first of all, and then the Apollo program leading up to the walk on the moon. And that was a religious experience for me. I remember tracking the mission, drawing the stages of the rockets, drawing where the rocket was relative to the moon and so on. I followed it as though it were a religious experience. I was still going to Mass on Sundays. It was a very benign Catholicism. There was no Sunday school or anything. We just went to Mass, and I actually enjoyed the experience. But what was going on with space and human technology and this machine, which is still the largest machine that humans ever built, the Saturn V rocket, is just stunning. So that was also the time of Star Trek, the first generation, and watching that, I remember watching those episodes was also a kind of religious experience for me. The lasers, seeing the lasers fire was numinous for me. And of course, seeing the transporters, a body being able to, with this sound and sort of sparkling light, a body able to dematerialize and rematerialize somewhere else. And this new myth of a galactic federation of planets, right, started attracting me along with so many other people at the time. And at that point, what I wanted to be was Captain Kirk, obviously. And if I couldn't be Captain Kirk, I at least wanted to be an astronaut or a pilot or a physicist, a scientist. And it seemed like physics was going to be my calling. But then the counterculture, last wave of the counterculture hit when I was 13, and psychedelics and so on, and something else happened. So I didn't pursue a career in science. And though I did get, I got kicked out of high school, but thankfully, a long story, I managed to finally get my grade 13 diploma, which got me into university, where I studied English literature and had a conversion experience to Jung in my myth and symbol course, and then did a double major in literature and religious studies. And I went on to graduate work in religious studies, comparative religion, Gnosticism, but always with Jung as my sort of backbone or bedrock. And then my PhD work on Hegel and Jung. But I never lost my interest. So, now I made that phaser, by the way, out of cardboard and so on. My then wife made my shirt. Hopefully my posture is a little better now than it was back then. All right, so 1997, when I moved, I became a professor in the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program. Right? The young kid on the block, the younger brother of Rick and Robert and Brian and Charlene and David Ulancy at the time. This was the course that I offered, and I only offered it once because as I said, the wave of excitement inexplicably just fizzled out. And maybe it was the Pluto-Saturn world transit that came in, and 9/11, the Iraq War. I mean, it all changed until recently. Okay? But at the time, I brought an integral perspective to the ET phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon. It was, among other things, I used Wilber's handy distinction between the four quadrants: the individual, collective, the interior, the exterior. And that was interesting. A couple of years later, my first doctoral student to graduate, Sean Esbjorn Hargens, he did his dissertation and founded the Wilberian track of integral ecology. I mean, there's the Thomas Berry track variety of integral ecology. There's Pope Francis's variety of integral ecology that we find in Laudato Si. And there's Ken Wilber's, there's Edgar Morin's, but he calls it general ecology. There's many varieties of integral ecology. But Sean was the first one to really raise this to an explicit academic discipline, the field of integral ecology. And since then, he has gone on to become a world expert on exo-studies. So the study of extraterrestrial matters, civilizations, cultures, and he's now a professor at the California Institute of Human Sciences, I think it's called. It's a kind of spin-off of a copy. It's a clone. It's a would-be clone of CIS. Hopefully, if this is ever posted, people will forgive me. I don't know anything about the Institute except that Sean is there. But Sean is brilliant, and look him up if you're interested in exo studies. Now, what I have proposed recently, instead of the four quadrants, is this quadrant, to try to approach the complexity of the ET and the UAP phenomenon by combining these two polar distinctions. So on the one hand, terrestrial, extraterrestrial. And on the other hand, physical, metaphysical. By metaphysical, I mean primarily that which is outside of or beyond what is the consensus among practicing scientists. Now, of course, there are always exceptions. Or we could say what is beyond the current reach of experimental science. Okay? So there's theoretical science, but if it's not capable of being enacted experimentally, then it's, in a sense, indistinguishable from science fiction. Right? So speculative science, science fiction, they overlap, put it that way. But metaphysical also includes an openness to the idea of transcendence, to an ontological realm that is not reducible to, cannot be collapsed into the physical as it is conceived by experimental science, right? So If we start with the physical extraterrestrial. Now, this is the most popular view, has been the most popular view for those people who believe in ETs, believe in UAPs, namely that our planet has been visited by physical crafts from different star systems. Okay? And that the things seen in the sky are literal, physical, usually metallic of some kind, craft. And inside are biological entities from other planets. Okay? We see this, all right, the kind of prototype story and event for this interpretation is the Roswell event. I don't have to tell you about Roswell, right? But how many of you have heard of Roswell? Okay, isn't that amazing? Yeah. Well, the story is still being debated, what really went on. There's also recently these Peruvian mummies. How many of you have seen the Peruvian mummies? Okay. Well, there's many people who believe that they are actually bodies of ETs. Make up your own mind. How many of you heard of Eric von Däniken? All right, even if you haven't, how many of you watched Ancient Astronauts on TV, History Channel and so on? So Eric von Däniken was the first one to popularize the idea of ancient astronauts. And that is the idea that Ezekiel actually had an encounter with. Okay, so, but if you read the back cover, because we find electric batteries many thousands of years old, because we find strange beings in perfect spacesuits with platinum fasteners, because we find numbers with 15 digits, something not registered by any computer. But how did these early men acquire the ability to create them? And so on and so on, right? Well, obviously it was aliens. Okay. And what? What's that? A lot of psychedelics were happening. Something was happening. I mean, something was happening with Ezekiel. Must have been aliens, okay? Who knows? It might have been aliens. But this is the idea of the ancient astronauts. One of my best friends, anyway, he's I love him, and we agree on just about everything. I was into Eric von Däniken when I was 15. Sorry, I don't mean to, if any of you are really into ancient astronauts, it just bothers me that the rich religious symbolism and mythological symbolism that we see from all over the world, to me, it's so impoverished if we reduce it to this sort of literalist, fundamentalist visitation of ETs. I don't need that to understand what's going on with them. Okay, so then there is the physical terrestrial possibility. So not literal aliens, but something real, like drones. In fact, most scientists believe that the vast majority of UAPs are in fact things like drones, or that's a weather balloon actually, weather balloons, drones, but sometimes it's not clear what it is. I actually took this picture walking in Tilden Park. Isn't it neat? I was finally, I've got my UAP. You know, I was really stoked for about 5 minutes. So I waited long enough, and the perspective changed. Okay, it was just I couldn't hear it when it was here. I couldn't hear the plane. I couldn't see the plane. I could just see what it was dragging at that angle. That was the perfect shape for these UFOs, and it was moving so slowly that anyway, I was convinced it was a UFO, but or a UAP. Sadly, not. Okay. But then there's the metaphysical extraterrestrial. Now, in a sense, this is what the founding myth of the West has been all along, right? A myth of extraterrestrial intelligence, but a myth in a metaphysical sense. This would include, you know, what people are actually experiencing when they're not seeing just weather balloons and drones and so on, or other things which we'll come to in a minute. They may be actually encountering angels, devas, or other subtle higher beings. That's why it's metaphysical. But this also includes the way I'm thinking now, and the thinking is not totally clear. So afterwards, if you see some problems or if you have suggestions of how this might be clear, please let me know after, because I'm still working on it. But there's these days, there's the so-called interdimensional hypothesis is quite popular. And this could include, for instance, real aliens, but who are not coming from their star systems through space, whether at subluminary speed or faster than light speed, but are actually getting here somehow instantaneously through some means, whether it's a wormhole or some other technology for mastering interdimensional travel. So they can sort of appear in our dimension here, right? So that's one possibility. This book maybe shouldn't be here, but it's an early book by Keith Thompson, where he was actually taking up on both Jung and the later researcher Jacques Vallée. I think I have a slide of him later, who point to the phenomenological similarities between experiences of encounters with angels and aliens in this case, but not only angels and aliens. It's another book one of the many books out that you can go to if you want to read about these things. Then we come to the terrestrial metaphysical. So what might that mean? Could include things like the elementals. Yeah, actually, Becca has, and did you go to Iceland too? No, you didn't? Oh, Becca went to Iceland. Becca, I think, had some encounters with elementals, didn't you? A little bit, okay. So there's the undines and sylphs and so on, gnomes. If you look at the folklore around these elementals, you'll see that their encounters share certain similarities with encounters with extraterrestrials. This is a depiction, I don't think it's a real thing, it's a depiction of a will-o'-the-wisp, right? These lights that appear, probably associated with methane or other gases that have, in folklore, would lure people either to their death or to strange experiences. This is the classic book by Jacques Vallée. Now, Jacques Vallée was the real researcher that the movie E.T., I guess, was it E.T.? Yeah. No, Close Encounters, sorry. Yeah, Close Encounters. Jacques Vallée was the real person that the scientist in Close Encounters was patterned off of. So in this book, Vallée gives many accounts of encounters usually close encounters with aliens, and shows the parallels with the world's folklore. And the suggestion is that now we experience them this way, but back then, whatever they were experienced this way. And it's not that back then they were really aliens that were mistaken for fairies, or that now our aliens are really fairies that were mistaken for aliens. But there's something mysterious that manifests differently depending upon the cultural context. So that's the basic idea. And the question of what it is sort of left open. Yeah? These are fairy circles. And fairy circles, I've never seen one. Has anybody seen one? Have you? Okay, I've never seen one. They're caused by a certain kind of mushroom, apparently. And but in traditional folklore, they are associated with elementals, fairies. And one of the things that is sometimes reported if you enter into a fairy circle is when you leave, more time has passed than when you were there. So the phenomenon of lost time. We see this in other fairy tales. We see it in there's the tale of the seven sleepers of Ephesus, a Christian tale of the seven Christians who were being persecuted. They hid in a cave, and when they came out, 200 years had passed, and it was a different emperor, and everybody had converted to Christianity by that point. So, but there's also the tale of an Irish folklore of Oisin and his journey to Tir na Nog. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But this is Urashima Taro. It's a very, very famous Japanese fairy tale where this fisherman saves a turtle who turns out to be a princess of the undersea world. And she brings him to her kingdom. They spend lovely time together. But he eventually comes back, and when he comes back, 300 years have passed, right? And everything has changed. So it's a common motif. It also happens to be a major motif in encounters with aliens, particularly, now we're getting into the abduction side of things, but I'm not going to spend really any time on that, other than to point to this very famous early case of abduction, the case of Betty and Barney Hill. And it so happened that yesterday in that 2-hour live stream, the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, Marden, I can't remember her first name, but she's a contemporary UAP researcher, and she seems quite intelligent. So if you watch that live stream, you'll see that that's still going on. So this is a book by masters, and the interesting thing here is that it's terrestrial metaphysical in the sense that the hypothesis is that aliens are actually us from our future. So somehow our future selves have found ways to travel back in time, and that's what we're encountering. So it's terrestrial, but it's metaphysical. Okay? Identified flying objects. Okay. Still in this category is the possibility of what Dean Radin calls social psi. So psi phenomena, which includes ESP and psychokinesis. And particular case of psychokinesis, the poltergeist phenomena. Poltergeist phenomena are usually associated with a single individual, often but not exclusively pubescent young women on the edge of puberty. Sometimes it's not women, and sometimes it's different ages, but the majority of cases seem to involve women on the threshold of puberty. And what happens is that objects start flying around and sounds are heard, and very strange things happen. Electrical circuits go awry. That's poltergeist phenomena. This is a picture of a group of researchers from Canada in Toronto, I think they were in Toronto, in the 1960s, who decided to, what they did is they invented a fictional character from, I don't know, 18th century, something like that. They came up with a whole biography for this person. They called him Philip. And they met regularly for a year trying to summon the spirit of Philip in a traditional form of a seance. And eventually, Philip appeared. So even though he was created by them, they acted as if he were real. And at a certain point, they started getting physical phenomena, particularly rapping sounds coming from the table, and even the table apparently, if not levitating, moving. You can watch a very grainy video of it, one of the seances online if you're interested. There's a book too, it's called Conjuring Philip. So this would be an example of what Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Sciences calls social psi, where it's not an individual, but a group whose resonant intention, conscious or otherwise, is able to produce some of the classic psychokinetic phenomena. Okay? So if that's possible with this group of 7 or 8 people, what might happen if tens of thousands and millions of people are somehow resonating consciously or unconsciously? So this is one possibility for what might be going on if we're going to take a metaphysical terrestrial approach to UAP phenomena. Because, yeah, all right, so this is a very good book, short book that explores the whole relationship. It's an extended treatment of psychical research and particularly psi approach to UAP phenomena. Little summary there. Okay. So we get coming back to Jung. Jung's the last book that he wrote. I think it was the last book, and he wrote other stuff after this book. I think this is the last full-length study that he wrote, if I'm not mistaken. Flying Saucers: A Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. And let me read to you his sort of assessment of the whole phenomenon, just one paragraph. So he said, he actually wrote this before writing this book, anticipating the book. He says, in the course of years, I have accumulated a voluminous dossier on the sightings, including the statements of 2 eyewitnesses well known to me personally. I myself have never seen anything, and have read all the available books. Now, there's been so many more since then, but Jung, just the prescient prophet that he was, you can imagine this guy doing this back then. So I've read all of the available books, but I found it impossible to determine even approximately the nature of these observations. So far, one thing is certain. It is not just a rumor. Something is seen. What is seen may in individual cases be a subjective vision or hallucination, or in the case of several observers seeing it simultaneously, a collective one. A psychic phenomenon of this kind would, like a rumor, have a compensatory significance, since it would be a spontaneous answer of the unconscious to the present conscious situation. That is, to fears created by an apparently insoluble political situation, which might at any moment lead to a universal catastrophe. At such times, men's eyes turn to heaven for help, and marvelous signs appear from on high of a threatening or a reassuring nature. Okay. So this was his assessment back then. And when he was writing, well, I'll get to that in a minute. So the main signs for Jung, okay, the basic idea is that Jung's model of the psyche, he sees the psyche like any living system, any self-organizing system, as capable of adaptation and dynamic sort of homeostasis. So to maintain its systemic integrity, when it's faced with a challenge to that, there'll be a compensatory movement to try to reestablish some kind of systemic integrity. Phenomenologically, the way that happens is that symbols of wholeness appear spontaneously. They're generated by the unconscious. Symbols of wholeness, particularly in the form of the mandala being the sacred circle. So at the center, like the labyrinth, right? So when you're walking the labyrinth, you're walking a mandala, and you're actually walking the central symbol of the psyche, which for Jung he called the self. Okay? Now, Jung made the, in a sense, obvious point that the central image in UAP phenomena are basically mandalas. They're concrete mandalas, particularly when seen from above. And these mandalas are charged with the same kind of numinosity for those who experience them, and particularly for those who combine the experience with the whole belief structure and worldview, the same numinous charge that we would traditionally have found in the Christian worldview of the Middle Ages. In this case, it's Dante in the Paradiso. So at the end of Dante's journey, where he is graced with the vision of the Godhead, with, I guess it's Beatrice by his side at this point, not Virgil, right? Yeah. So this is Gustave Doré, by the way, his engravings of Dante. This is one of Jung's mandalas from the Red Book, just to give you a flavor of an intuitive sense of mandalas. It's from Hildegard of Bingen. Jake could tell us what's going on here. Is it the new Adam? I don't know if... The old Adam? Okay. All right. Wow. It's spent a lot of time on that image. This is Amida Buddha, I'm pretty sure, the Buddha of infinite light from, it's a Japanese mandala. Whoops. This is a classic representation of Christ with the tetramorph, with the four evangelists. And if you know the iconography, you'll see that this takes over from the earlier depiction of Horus in Egyptian mythology, where you'll see the four shapes surrounding Horus. Tibetans doing their sand mandalas. In this case, the version of the Kalachakra mandala, I'm pretty sure. So these, Jung felt that these, just as in the religious context, these symbols, and particularly mandalic symbols, serve to organize, catalyze, and guide consciousness toward meaning and wholeness. So in a time of generalized disruption and impending catastrophe, the collective psyche will produce its own images of wholeness. So at the time that Jung was writing, the greatest threat was nuclear annihilation from the Cold War. You may not remember those, most of you are too young to remember, but I vividly remember. Just occasionally, hit me that any moment, and I still have dreams where I see the mushroom clouds coming from the distance. I'm just waiting for the whole thing to hit. The fact is, that's as real now, if not more so, than it was when Jung was writing. There are, it's true, less nuclear warheads than there were when at the height of the Cold War, but things are so unstable, and the planetary political context is so complex. It's no longer just the United States and the Soviet Union. There's many more actors, and there's even so-called talk among the insane men behind most of the nation states, talking about so-called tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine and Russia and so on. So it's still with us. Along with that, of course, since 1945, since before the Cold War, since right after the Second World War, we've been engaged in what many people call the Great Acceleration. If you look at various graphs of Earth systems, as well as human physical social systems, you see that everything, the whole planet is in a process of exponential acceleration toward catastrophe, toward global CO2 heat. I mean, this is 800. This is 800,000 years. You see that the alternation of CO2 in the atmosphere over 800,000 years. Our species only comes onto the scene around 300,000 years ago, right? And then in our time, we have this wall. Okay? And of course, it's already leading to global heating on a catastrophic scale. And that's with only 1.5 where we are now. We're already at 1.5 Celsius. The consensus is that even if we stopped all emissions now, we're pretty much guaranteed, the consensus is, to at least 3 degrees Celsius, if not 4 or 5. And we know what's happened. This is what's happened with 1.5. Okay? Just a little, we don't need a reminder, but along with that, of course, the very web or tree of life is being sawed at the roots. this is almost impossible to take in. I mean, it's the death of complex life. I don't know. I can find it later, but I just found it searching for, you know. So, you know, we are the first humans. Even Jung wasn't aware of this. He may have been aware of it on his deathbed or shortly before, because one of the last things that he said to his daughter when he was in bed close to death was, you know, he saw vast stretches of the earth destroyed, but not all of it, thank God, he said. And he drew a wavy line, and under it he wrote, "The last 50 years of humanity." And he wrote that in 57, I think it was 57. It would have been 2012, actually, for those 50 years, if you go 50 years from that time. But Jung didn't consciously see the mass extinction that is now accelerating in our time. He saw the possibility of nuclear annihilation, and he was aware of the threat to the biosphere, with certainly with pollution and habitat destruction. He was very sensitive to that. But he couldn't conceive consciously the extent and the speed with which the biosphere and complex life is unraveling in our own times. And even if we don't know it consciously, we feel it in our cells, in our bones, because we are that life, right? And certainly if you're intelligent and sensitive as you are, otherwise we wouldn't be here, you know, we have open heart minds. So we can take this in, not all the time, and we shouldn't expect ourselves to take it in all the time. I don't take it in all the time. I live in my own private worlds most of the time, but I try to open myself to it as much as I can. And so to the extent that humans are opening themselves to that, if Jung's analysis is correct, then clearly we can expect compensatory gestures on the part of the collective unconscious, on the part of the anima mundi, of the creative depths of the human and planetary psyche. And what might that look like? Well, presumably it'll depend upon which individuals and which groups and cultures you're in, the way it would manifest. Of course, it might actually be aliens coming in. So if you go to the New Paradigm Institute, they believe that the aliens have been here, they are here, they want to reveal themselves completely, but we're not quite ready for it. And but if they did reveal themselves to us, then you know, what could happen is that they have the superior technology, zero-point energy, anti-gravity, presumably limitless genetic engineering, let alone interdimensional travel, that presumably all of our problems, the threat to complex life over global heating, could be solved. At least that's the expectation for people like Jim Garrison, Danny Sheehan, and the people at the New Paradigm Institute, and many, many people who are now engaged in the UAP phenomenon. And you know, I want to believe that. Part of me believes it. You know, I said in our opening, I'm he, him, but I am they. Sean Kelly is not a monolith. There is a part of me that is a true believer in this. There's also a part of me that's a devout, you know, Catholic. And there's a part of me that is a Pure Land Buddhist. And there's a part of me that is a hard-nosed skeptic. I carry the pull of doubt. And maybe I could conclude just by reading just a couple of paragraphs from a short paper that I've written on the topic that is still in process. But this is the vision of what people, the true believers, believe is possible after disclosure. This is actually a scene of Starfleet Academy in San Francisco. From, you know, of how things could be. We've solved all of our problems. Not only is there gender equality, but there's gender fluidity, there's species fluidity, there's interplanetary, even possibly even intergalactic harmony. I mean, there's occasional conflicts with, with species until we get them to speak English. But, no, they have the universal translator, and we're getting close to that with the Google translating is getting pretty good. All right, so I'll conclude with this. Oh, sorry, I should have said, this vision is actually just, again, a completely secularized vision of the last act of the Great Code, which is the New Jerusalem, the new heaven and the new earth. So this was the expectation, imaginally, archetypally, for the Western psyche for 1,500 years. This is what guided, was the telos that guided the river of meaning, was toward this expectation, this hope in a new heaven and a new earth. But once that is gone, then, what's left? Well, that's what's left, right? Okay. When asked whether or not he believed in God, Jung famously replied, "I don't believe, I know." By contrast, despite his intense fascination and long-term serious study of the phenomenon, he refused to claim any sort of knowledge about the reality or ultimate nature of UFOs. I too don't know. Like the X-Files' Mulder, I want to believe that we have been visited, that the truth is not only out there, but that all in time shall be revealed. If it is to make any meaningful difference, however, any such revelation will need to happen very soon, if it's not already too late. I will never lose my own fascination for the topic of UAPs and the question of extraterrestrial intelligence. What concerns me is that the archetypal power of the topic, especially when it involves the expectation of imminent disclosure, can act as a grand distraction away from what most deserves our attention: how to mitigate, if not halt, the accelerating great unraveling of the web of life, how to respond to already overwhelming levels of human suffering that are certain to increase over the coming years. Given my concerns, and thinking of the true believers, and my own inner true believer, I imagine the following. We finally have conclusive proof that UAPs are caused by literal physical ETs. But as their behavior suggests, a functionally godlike superiority in terms of technology. As some maintain, they, or a contingent of them at least, have our best interests at heart. What they most want is for us to evolve to our full potential, not only technological, but ethical and spiritual as well. They know that for this to happen, the human community will need to become a true humanity, one that has overcome its barbarism and recognizes itself as part of and bound to protect, celebrate, and love the whole of the Earth community. The reason why they have not revealed themselves to us fully and publicly, have not openly shared their zero-point energy and interstellar travel technologies with us, is that we are not morally and spiritually ready to be received among the Galactic Federation. In this scenario, as paradoxical as it might seem, the only way for humans to reach the stars is for them to demonstrate their love for each other and for this living Earth. No passport to the heavens without first establishing a new Earth. The ETs will not save us from ourselves. As Kepler said, terra stella nobilis. Earth is itself a noble star. And until humans treat it as such, they will not be worthy of being welcomed by our stellar neighbors. Though one of my part selves might want to believe in the above scenario, and more generally, in the truth of the literal ET hypothesis, or at least the, to my mind, more plausible interdimensional hypothesis. Another part self, the one I choose to identify with, feels compelled to carry the pole of doubt, as Richard Tarnas loves to remind us we should do as scholars. And this from two directions. First, as a matter of intellectual integrity, of the kind Jung demonstrated with his ontological agnosticism. Secondly, as a matter of ethical integrity, in wanting to respond most efficaciously to the accelerating planetary polycrisis. By all means, let us continue to study UAP and related phenomena. Not only are they intrinsically fascinating, they encourage us to push the boundaries of knowledge and help keep us open to the great mystery. Let us also be wary, however, of archetypal possession and the fallacy of misplaced apocalyptic concreteness. Yes, time for questions? Thank you. I'm so glad it's over. I haven't, done a public. I've done Zoom talks live with, but I haven't done with a live audience in quite a long time. So we have time for comments, questions. Yes, Candace.
First of all, that was so fabulous. Wow. Yeah, so I learned this summer about Drake's Law. And it was
Oh, Drake's Law? Mm-hmm.
Drake's Law. I was just blown away by it because what it said to me is a little bit what you said behind it is, the math is saying that there's an overwhelming likelihood of consciousness in so many places.
Yeah.
But that our ever experiencing it is highly dependent on the civilization collapsing to communicate given. So that for me was very beautiful because it actually put us back on this thing of let's focus on how long has our civilization developed, right? Like let's focus on what it would even mean to have a sustainable. We're such babies. Love that Brian Springs says. Make this transition. We don't have that much time, but what I loved about Drake's Law is this idea that yes, it's so likely that we have nuclear. We're gonna have to earn it. All of these civilizations will have to by your
Thank you. Yeah, I personally have I am intuitively certain that the cosmos is chock full of inhabited planets with beings much like us, some of them even vastly superior to us, ethically, and so on. But my sense is that physical communication between these planets is impossible. But other kinds of communication might be possible. And my dreams, that many dreams of being on other planets and seeing crafts and so on. So I think it's possible that way, but I'm very skeptical of the literal ET interpretation. Right. Yes. Yeah, John was actually a very good friend of Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff, and I met him in actually at the first conference around Stan at Esalen in 1999, I think it was. I had the great experience of at break watching cheesy alien movies with him, sitting beside him eating popcorn. And I was telling Vince today that at that time I was actually hoping to see if I could see him for some sessions to uncover some of my own, apparent experiences. But he tragically was killed by getting hit by a car in London. So yeah, John Mack is. So metaphysical terrestrial. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Hmm. Do you remember where he talks about that? Is that in one of? Is that in Passport to the Cosmos? Really? No? Oh, okay. Mm. 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 Neat. Sarah Lisa. Oh yeah. Yeah, what a great question. Well, interestingly, some of the footage that, if you look, some of the relatively recent footage shows, appears to show an object. It's roughly spherical, um, apparently going quite fast above the ocean, and then occasionally going into it, in and out of the ocean, seamlessly. And they call these intramedia. So that's why the UAP phenomena includes not only aerial, so it can either be unidentified aerial or unidentified anomalous phenomena. So the second reading includes different media. It's not just aerial. That's for things seen in different media. But yeah, there's some who believe that the aliens are actually intraterrestrial. And that also overlaps with the Hollow Earth theory. It was quite popular actually in Nazi Germany. And we see it also in legends around Shasta. Right? Many people believe that Shasta is sort of hollow and that aliens come in and out of Shasta all the time. So yeah, I think probably the phenomenology would be at a deep level the same. I don't know whether the elements would make any significant difference, but I'm not familiar enough with the details. Neat question. Yeah, oh, okay, we've got 3 in a row here. Well, or maybe you, and then we'll go back to answer. Then we'll come back to please. Yes.
Oh, okay. So some of your last statements of the presentation like sparked a thought that I had as as I'm trying to propose my dissertation topics and things like how we change our beliefs and how it can invert our world views and things like that. And one of the main aspects of trying to cultivate the good, capital G, is practices, ways of living and being that involve love.
Mm.
And so, especially pertains to like the Whiteheadian notion of evil, which is like a disharmony. So I'm always interested in interrogating people like yourself about what kind of, it's very personal, kind of, spiritual practices, things that you can do that can also like permeate, collective consciousness that cultivate that love and good, capital G. What are the types of things, whether theistic or not, that we can all do together, that can cultivate.
You mean do it as groups? You mean, or individually?
Yeah. And I know that's a really vague question, but I'm asking it that way on purpose because I want to know,
Yeah.
kinds of things that come to your mind.
Well, I mean, personally, I feel radically deficient in doing things. I feel I should be, giving all I own to the poor, etc. And I'm not. When I remember, I try to visit people in the hospital. I haven't gone to see people in prison. I mean, so I think these kinds of things are extremely, like, ontologically meaningful. And obviously, if there are social programs and political platforms that tend to the disadvantaged in whatever form, including our other than human kin, then so politically, individually, There are affinity groups that you can join. So seek out people that well, we're doing it here. We all resonate with fundamental values here. So I think what we're doing here is one thing. I don't know if that's approaching what you're talking about, though.
Yeah, it is. I guess I should ask you.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd love to know yours too. So let's do it. Yeah. Answer. Answer. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Thank you. Matt?
I know we're talking about aliens, but I'm kind of curious about these Canadians that you mentioned.
Oh. Yeah.
You tried to create this seance on your meeting. Can you share some, like, what was motivating this group? How did they form? Like,
Well, they were part of the, I think, like Canadian Society for Psychical Research. So they were interested in doing research in psychical phenomena. So, I mean, parapsychology and psychical research overlap. Parapsychology tends to be more lab-based and statistically oriented, at least the way it's done now, and involves, technology and things like that. Whereas psychical research came out of 19th century and early 20th century spiritualism, especially. So it deals with contacts with the so-called dead, as Steiner would say, usually through seances. But there are other related psychical phenomena, like Madame Blavatsky. She claimed to have channeled these letters from the Mahatmas, and the British Society for Psychical Research investigated her and pronounced her fraudulent. But interestingly, as Robert likes to say, not too long ago, about a century later, they apologized and they retracted because they found that the investigator was biased and there wasn't enough actual evidence to prove that she had committed fraud. So that's interesting. But are you wondering about them? So you can
this group wanted to see if they could invent
yes.
a personality that never really existed and see if they could create just through their shared intention.
They wanted to see whether acting as if this person were real, and so they met regularly and they talked about this person. They got familiar with the life that they had invented, and then they started meeting regularly, just trying to contact him as if he were dead, and just as you would in a seance to try to contact spirits of the dead. And they started getting the same kinds of phenomena, particularly the classic phenomena with the Fox sisters in upstate New York, which began the spiritualist movement, were rapping sounds coming from the walls.
I find this terribly upsetting because, like, I want to believe that we can contact the dead, but now here they are.
It's true.
I guess, yeah.
I know, but there's other evidence though that comes out of the research that can't be explained by social psi. Like this, they didn't call it social psi. This is Dean Radin's term, but it seems to be an example of social psi. But there are other cases which, of course, skeptics would reject anyway. But those who have an open mind that seem to have produced information that can't be explained by the collective knowledge of the people involved. So that there really are sometimes things communicated that only the dead person knows or knew. Right. But this was a fictitious person, yeah. But what's interesting is that it didn't communicate information that they didn't already know, as far as I know. But it produced some of the physical phenomena.
Did it
That
happen in the persona of the, like, did it just produce the phenomena associated with a visitation or medium that are like general, or did it act in the persona of this invented character?
as far as I know, it just produced rapping sounds and moved the table. Those two classic things. But it did it on demand,
Yeah.
which was pretty neat. Oh, Jake, yeah.
This is so great. Thank you, Sean. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, good.
It was fantastically done. The way you interwove the correct word, like your personal relationship to this in your own biography, along with a really rich and nuanced exploration of a difficult topic to talk about.
Oh, thank you.
I just want to say that was awesome. One of the, I also wanted to ask about the Canadians. There would be more about that afterwards. It's a fantastic example that I'd never heard of before. I wanted to ask about your 4 quadrants, not Wilbur's, but the ones you came up with, which I think are really helpful. And I wonder whether you think part of the confusion around all of this is that we're identifying discrete categorical phenomena and lumping them all together because we have such a non-granular vision of this, right? So we've got like all these anomalous phenomena people are experiencing. We're like, well, is it nuts and bolts, or is it metaphysical, or is it terrestrial, or is it otherworldly? And like, why not multiple?
Yeah.
Like, why not? Yeah, there are elementals that people mistake for ETs, but there are also like weirdly things showing up on radar that seem.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, there are these physical artifacts which are unexplained. They're unidentified by definition. Right? According to the scientists, most of the scientists, I should say, there are some scientists who think that they have identified them as alien craft, but the consensus, as far as it goes among scientists, is that they are unidentified, or they are like that first slide that we started with the Nimitz thing. There are scientists that can explain those through optical effects with the sensors on the planes and so on, but there's no agreement. And who knows? What I find fascinating is that nothing fundamentally has changed since Jung's assessment. He was open. He thought that there was something real in some cases, but we just don't know what it is. Oh, sorry, Claire. And then Carol, and then Claire. You had your hand up, Carol, and then Claire. And I'm listening. I'm just going to get the last little drip of my wine from last night, which is gone. Somebody drank it. Oh no, here it is. Here it is. There's only a sip. But I've got one. Thanks. Yes, Carol.
You're wanting me to be louder. Thank you for this. This is a whole lot of fun. Thank you for listening to Jesus List. I also have not yet visited so many. Once I think about it, I gotta get that done. What do you think? 2 things. One, Canadian group of scientists.
Oh yeah.
In my experience of working with deceased souls and astral planes, I really suspect that souls showing up.
So can you speak up a bit? Your voice is fading.
in my experience of working with deceased souls and astral
Mm-hmm.
worlds, it sounds very, and with clients and their experience, sounds very much like showed up and
Oh, for poltergeist stuff, you mean?
yes.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Yes. Because there are
Oh.
all kinds of beings in other realms who do
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it didn't sound novel. But it sounds like
You're fading again. Sorry. Your voice, I think I could hear it. Yeah. Okay.
it sounds like a lost soul or deceased soul just showed up and was like, hey, I can play this game.
Sure.
I want to do one moment of PCC research on this subject. One question. How many of you have looked up at the starry sky and felt like you were seeing home up there somewhere? Two of us? Two of us in PCC have looked up at the starry sky and felt this feeling of home. Wow, that's really interesting. Oh, three? Maybe? Is it a maybe? Yeah.
Definitely felt wonder, but. Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting. Well, at least two of us and at least three maybes. Thank you for that moment of research.
Thank you. Clara.
Your talk opened up these regions of my imagination and heart that were activated when I was a young child by the likes of Madeleine L'Engle and her Time Quartet, or C.S. Lewis and his Space Trilogy, which are still learning the significance of those texts in my life. But anyway, my question is about, I'm curious what your take might be on aggressive aliens.
Yeah.
Like alien is enemy, alien is monster, alien is colonist, the earth is his passageway or his farmland. You know, the alien that impregnates the unsuspecting housewife. You know, like that sort of trope within culture. Is that an important distinction to make, or is that we just lump that all in with?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my own experiences have all been of violent abductions. So, and if you look at the abduction literature, and I mean that seriously, my own experiences are all like pretty traumatic, but and yet I've had dreams that are the other side of things. But the abduction literature is mixed. There's definitely a traumatic element, an element of violation, trauma, malevolence, as Carol was saying. And in the lore, the ET lore, they distinguish between different species, some of whom are more benign and than others. The reptilians, I believe, are not that cool, right? And of course, the Nordics. You can see how they talk about the type that Sarah Lisa was talking. There's a kind of echoes of the root races, the idea of the root races, where you've got the reptilians, which is like our brainstem, and then the neocortex. But of course, it's identified with the Nordics, which is fine if you're a Caucasian, I guess. But they are they're the tall, blonde, superior ones. The grays are ambivalent as far as I know. I mean, some are good, some are not so good. They're gray. But they're also the ones who most resemble what might some people think of as our own future selves, where our bodies have continued along the line of neoteny. Brian used to speak of the human mutation, as it were, as one of neoteny, right? Where we're born prematurely, universally. Humans, unlike other mammals who mature relatively quickly, we come into the world really naked and totally dependent for a long period of time, need to be taken care of until we're mature enough. So the grays look like that line taken to an extreme, where they're completely hairless, they're big crania with big eyes and very small mouths. And anyway, you know the typical gray. Is that sort of answering your question?
No.
Okay.
That's not your fault because I didn't phrase it. I was more interested in going back to the notion of apocalypse that you started with. I'm thinking about scenarios that end in destruction of the earth
Oh.
versus scenarios that are about learning and hope.
Right.
And is that a distinction?
They're both, but in the biblical Great Code, it's both, of course, right? Everything is destroyed, but then there's a new heaven and a new earth. So the New Jerusalem is one of renewal, right? But it is preceded by generalized destruction of the planet as we know it. So that's in the biblical myth. In the current literature, the history of the literature and the current literature, there is awareness of impending apocalypse and apocalyptic destruction, and the promise of a new heaven and new earth. So it's the same myth, the same mythic structure, but now it's the idea that their technology and superior civilization, but particularly their technology, is going to save us. That's the story now. So rather than the grace, divine grace, and angels, it's aliens and their technology. It may be true, and I just hope they, take me. I mean, come. I've been telling them to do it for decades and decades. Sorry, Daria. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Tom. This was fantastic. I kind of had a question. Part of my question was about when you were reading this, was very hopeful ending of like, yes, these beings that once they evolve and now they will come and help us. I did feel like, we might also need to have discernment because there, I mean, in my perspective, like all realms are in our experience as human beings, as we compare ourselves to some other species on the planet that are more, we're more technologically evolved. We don't always have the